Good morning from Calgary, and welcome to another Arthur E. Child pop-up policy event hosted by the Canada West Foundation. This is the first one I've hosted in some time, and being here reminds me that these events originated as a chance for us to bring stakeholders, Canada West stakeholders, into the office to hear people that were coming through Western Canada. And we would have 50, 75 people crammed in here, sitting on desks, well below fire capacity if the Calgary Fire Department's listening in on this conversation. But today's conversation, we wouldn't be able to do that. We'd have to knock out some walls and take over the offices next door. The response to this event has been that high. It's an indication of the interest that Western Canadians have in China, and how our relationship, the trade relationship in particular, which is today's topic, impacts us here in Western Canada. That interest is understandable. I mean, we all know the figures. China is now our second largest trading partner, has been for some time. The rate of growth of that trade is faster than with the United States and with most other markets. We also realize that even over the past 4 years, 4 of the most difficult years in the relationship, that trade has continued to grow, and not just magically by itself. Those of you listening, your family, your neighbors, your businesses in your community, in your province, have made decisions to actively increase trade with China. So that makes understanding what happens with this market extremely important for us in Western Canada. But that importance goes beyond just the Chinese market. Canada is an extremely trade-dependent country. I mean, take Alberta. A third of the GDP of Alberta, roughly, comes from exports. You go south across the border to Montana, that figure is only 6%. So what happens to global markets is also extremely important for us. And that is part of the true importance of China and understanding how China impacts us. Not just in the Chinese market, but if you want to sell to the Indo-Pacific region, you're selling to a region where China is the dominant economic force and the regional political force. Surviving in the world where China is now the world's largest economy at purchasing power parity requires understanding what's happening on the mainland in China. So we're very fortunate that the ambassador has agreed to join us today to shed some insight into the economic and trade relationship with China, with Canada, but also how it impacts Western Canadian interests globally. I would note that today's conversation, as I mentioned, will focus just on the economics and the trade relationship. We're fortunate in that our colleagues at the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy, at the Center for International Governance and Innovation, at the Asia Pacific Foundation, and others have had conversations with the ambassador on the political, security, and other elements of the relationship, freeing us to focus on an issue of extreme importance for Western Canada. So links to those talks by our colleagues are in the chat function. You'll also find a link in the chat function to our China brief. If you're interested in today's conversation, if you're in Western Canada or trying to understand Western Canada's relationship with China on the trade front, we publish a monthly brief of the major issues, and we strongly urge you to subscribe to that. Before I turn it over, just let me note that our focus on the economic and trade relationship is, as I mentioned, thanks to our colleagues. We are going to have a conversation with the ambassador, but questions have already been incorporated into the discussion by talking to stakeholders of Canada West, businesses, communities, provincial governments with whom we're engaged very closely. We've already consulted and discussed the topic matter and their input. This is a Western Canadian conversation. Their input has been incorporated into the questions. With that, I'll turn it over to your host, the former Alberta Chief Representative to Washington, D.C., former Alberta Chief Representative to Asia, based in Hong Kong, and currently the CEO of the Canada West Foundation, Gary Marr. Gary?
Carlo, thanks so much for that introduction. I want to welcome everybody to this pop-up policy event tonight. I thank you for taking an hour out of your day to learn more about this really important key trade relationship. And by your attendance, I assume that you are aware of the importance of this relationship to our economy and that you want to learn more. Now, as Carlo noted, China is our second largest trading partner, and it's critical to ag sectors such as pork, beef, canola, and other crops. And as such, knowing more about the direction that China is moving in, what China's vision is for the relationship with Western Canada, will help Canadian companies evaluate opportunities with China. People need information to make better decisions. That decision might be to enter the market, it might be to expand in the market, or it might be to withdraw from the market. But in any case, information that helps improve the West's economy and the way that we live here in Western Canada is what we do at Canada West Foundation. So our research, our events, our publications are all geared towards the same outcome, and that is to find solutions to some of Canada's most pressing problems. So today's talk supports that aim, because the more you know about your business partners, the better the decisions that you'll make. And if anyone can provide us with an overview of China's thinking about its trade relationship and plans for Western Canada, it's Ambassador Zhang. The ambassador is a career diplomat who has served as China's ambassador to Canada since 2019. Prior to that, he was with the Department of North American and Oceanic Affairs with the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So he's certainly familiar with our country and our continent. I could read to you his biography, but that won't be as interesting as if I asked the ambassador himself about his background. So let's bring him in. Ambassador Zhang, welcome to our event with Canada West Foundation. For the sake of the audience, rather than reading your biography, I thought I'd ask you about your background and how you came to your current job and what you bring to the position that may be of interest to our audience of Western Canadians. So tell us about yourself, Ambassador.
Thank you. Good morning. First, I would like to express my appreciation to Gary and the foundation for organizing today's event. And we can have a chance to be engaged in a constructive dialogue about the trade relationship between our two sides, especially between China and the western part of Canada. And for myself, it's not the first time I was posted in Canada. About more than 20 years ago, I was here. That was in the January 2000. And that was my first time, for posting, and I was here in the embassy in Ottawa. I spent 3 years for the first posting, and I traveled to some places, but not so many in the western part. I just went to British Columbia. So I thought maybe I could have more chances to be back to see more of Canada. And this time, as you mentioned, I was here in September 2019. And I thought that after I presented my credential, that I can have a lot of opportunities to visit different parts of Canada. And I would be loving to do so, to see the natural and the cultural beauty of Canada, and to talk to the people here, to seek their advice on our relationship, and also to tell them the stories about China. But unfortunately, I just did manage to be outside of Ottawa for 2 official visits after my presenting my credential, in early November. And the first time, was to Newfoundland. That was in mid-November. And the second time was to Manitoba. That was in December 2019. So I saw part of Western Canada, but still not enough. I still haven't been to Saskatchewan and Alberta yet. But because of COVID-19, I had to suspend all the traveling schedules. But I do hope that after the situation gets better, I can be there as soon as possible. And also, for my second time here, really it's excited to be back to a country that I was familiar with. Of course, there's a lot of change taking place here in Canada. And I have taken note a lot of new buildings here in Ottawa. Even in a city like Ottawa, there's a lot of construction sites and apartments. So it means that the population is on increase. So that's good news. And for myself, also I know that I carry a lot of weight in my responsibility as the envoy from China to Canada, and I'm supposed to do a lot of things to communicate between our two sides and to relay the message from China and to make sure that people here will feel the friendly feelings from the Chinese people. And also we should focus on those practical cooperation. Of course, we have to deal with sensitive issues, but really I think my job is to make sure that we can work together for a better relationship, which is beneficial to the people of the two countries and even beyond. So that's my maybe a very long answer to your brief question. Thank you.
Well, so I have actually a couple of things that I observed, but one is having been here 20 years ago, that was around the time that China acceded to the WTO, and now China is seeking admission to the CPTPP. I'll ask you a bit more about that down the road and what you might have learned from the experience 20 years ago and what China's doing with CPTPP. But I can't help but notice the books that are on the shelf behind you. We've met twice now, Ambassador, and you've got an encyclopedia of Chinese history. You've got an Oxford Law Dictionary. You've got a Chinese English dictionary and encyclopedia. If you were to recommend a book for our viewers to read, to have a greater understanding of China, what would that book be?
Maybe, Gary, if people here would like to know better about what happened, since the past 10 years here in China, I think that's important. So my recommendation is a book, called The Governance of China. That is from President Xi's important speech, for the past 10 years, which you can see that why the China has enjoyed such a great development, in the past 10 years, and why China is pursuing a philosophy of people-centered approach, and at the same time, maintaining a global vision. And that means that we would like to develop friendly cooperation with all the other countries. And if people here would like to be interested in the China-Canada relationship, I read a book, before I came here this time. It was by a Chinese scholar. It was about the China-Canada relationship back in the 20th century. And I found it very interesting because in the book, it dated back, not only to the 19th century, what happened in the 1800s, but also a lot of discussion about what was happening in the 1940s. And the first ambassador from Canada, he mentioned, he compared, between the Communist Party and the Kuomintang Party. And he found out that actually the Communist Party enjoyed vast majority, the support from the vast majority, because they really cared about the welfare of the people. So that's also very interesting. A lot of discussions on that, but it's just, from the history ended, I think, at the year of 2000 or what. So, but it's, I think, gives people some sense of how our relationship had evolved over the past century. So that's, my recommendation for the friends here. Thank you.
So if anybody comes by my office, they can borrow my book. It's 2 volumes, so it's quite a bit of reading.
3 volumes now.
It's 3 volumes. Okay, so I'm a little behind. I'll catch up, Ambassador. I promise to do better. So I want to dive into the substance of our discussion today and delve into some, first into some broad questions and then later into more specific ones. So my first broad question, maybe it's a 2-part question, is to ask, how do you perceive the current relationship between Canada and China? And what do you see as the prospects or opportunities, or perhaps your predictions for 2022? That's just on a broad sense.
Okay, I have noted that recently, a lot of people here in Canada, the people of inside, they have called for China and Canada to build back their previous strong relationship as quickly as possible. Of course, I have also taken note. There are still, a number of people suggesting, different views. So I would like to take this opportunity to share a few points on our bilateral relationship. The first is that the foundations of friendship at the grassroots level between China and Canada is actually very strong. People in both countries have long been bearing friendly sentiments towards each other, and this is the source of strength and important advantage for China-Canada relationship. Over a century ago, more than 10,000 Chinese workers came to Canada to help build the Pacific Railroad, making contributions to the development and unity of Western Canada. Norman Bethune in China is also a household name, with his stories known by everyone across the country. Today, many friends are working hard to promote the mutual understanding between our two sides. And of course, during the pandemic, China and Canada provided medical supplies to each other, once again demonstrating the fine tradition of mutual assistance at times of difficulty. The second point is that there's great potential for practical cooperation between our two countries. China and Canada are natural partners. We have conducted trade since the 1950s at the grassroots level, and over the 50+ years since we established diplomatic relations back in 1970, our bilateral trade has increased 500-fold. According to a recent CCBC report, China-Canada Business Council, Chinese investment in Canada and the international students from China, together with the Canadian export to China, have helped created nearly 500,000 jobs here in Canada. China has a population of more than 1.3 billion. And for us, we have also an increasing population of middle income group. So if that momentum continues, that means even greater potential for our future cooperation. Canada is a developed economy and boasts rich resources and experience in areas such as education, finance, regulation, and elderly care. There are many opportunities for collaboration between China and Canada. The third point I would like to share is that China and Canada have a lot of consensus on multilateral issues. Both China and Canada resolutely support multilateralism and free trade, and both countries are playing important roles in pushing for the world to deal with climate change. Both China and Canada have wide-range common language when it comes to subjects like COVID-19 response, sustainable development, environmental protection, and clean energy. While addressing the 2022 World Economic Forum virtual session, President Xi noted that the world is currently experiencing profound change unseen in a century. How can we defeat COVID-19? How should we rebuild in the post-COVID world? These are important questions facing every country and are also questions that we must urgently answer. The relationship between our two countries has enormous cooperation potential and a bright development future. I believe that both our two countries are able to make contributions to answering these important questions. China and Canada should uphold mutual respect and equal treatment, grasp the overall trend, work towards the same direction, enhance communication, focus on cooperation, handle differences in a careful way, and to make sure that we propel our relationship to return to the right track and improve further. So I hope that the Canada West Foundation and everyone here today will continue to make your contribution to this end. So that's my opening remarks. Thank you.
Thanks. Ambassador, I appreciate you sharing the position of your government. And I I will let you know that there's over 300 people that have registered for today's event. Over a third of them represent businesses and trade associations, commodity producers. There's quite a number that have come from government, both provincial and federal governments from across Western Canada and in Ottawa, but also some foreign missions have decided to join our talk today. And finally, a large number of academics. There's, I think, about 3 dozen or 4 dozen academics based on the suffixes of their emails that have joined the 300 some people that have registered today. So that's the audience that you're speaking to. I want to go specifically into an area of trade in the West. For many Canadian producers, canola and pork are top of mind, but let's start with canola. Is there anything that you can share that we wouldn't know already through following in the media with respect to what's happening in the canola dispute between China and Canada?
I think first I would like to share you with some, very exciting figures. According to Canadian figures, from January to November last year, China still remained Canada's biggest canola seed importer, importing 1.69 billion Canadian dollars of canola seed. This is a 30.5% increase year on year and accounts for 28.8% of Canada's total canola seed export, much higher than the overall growth rate of 3.1% of Canadian canola seed export. So I think that's very good news. And for us, as I mentioned, actually the Chinese and the Canadian economies are highly complementary in nature. China is a huge market that needs high quality and safe products from Canada and elsewhere. So the Chinese government, at the same time, is duty bound to make sure that the consumer's safety is guaranteed. So some certain measures we adopt when it comes to the canola seed products from Canada. It's just, to make sure that the consumers in China, they will have, the food safety protected. So that is in line with our domestic law and international practice. But still, I think we can find a way to resolve all the remaining issues and to make sure the canola export to China will have an even greater boost in the coming months and years. And I think the two sides, the technical departments of the two sides, are still having communication over those technical issues. And it is hoped that they can resolve those technical issues as soon as possible.
So on resolving those types of technical issues, do you have a sense of what the steps are that will be necessary to do that? Do you have a sense of the timeline by which it can be done? Do you have a sense of how we can avoid tripping up on the domestic concerns that you have in the future? I guess that's a three-part question. Starting with steps, what are the steps that we should be taking?
I think first steps is to make sure that people here, to prove that the export from Canada, is safe, because from some of the inspections over the years, still, there are some results that concerns the experts, back in China. So I think the first step is for people here to demonstrate that really, the products from Canada is high quality and at the same time is safe. And for the timeline, I personally are not aware of timeline, but my personal belief and my hope is that we can do that as quickly as possible. So because that is not only good for the exporter here, for Canadians, but also it is good for the consumers in China.
I appreciate the desire to make sure that food supply is safe. I appreciate that and I understand that completely. Do you apply the same standards to imports that come from the United States or Australia?
It's the same thing. I think that we apply, those standards, to all the countries, like what happened, for the COVID-19, it's also the same thing, because for the cold chain, of course, there are a lot of arguments or controversies, over this. But when it is found out that for those imported, articles, which contains the virus, it's whether from Canada or any other country or Russia, anything that is, containing those virus, we have to be very careful. And in the past, all those practices have shown that we apply the same standards to those imports. So just want to use additional example to demonstrate that really we have this equal treatment for the imports from other countries.
Okay, so well, let's go on to other commodities. I think I was recently reading something from in the Nikkei and elsewhere that China has been dramatically increasing its overall grain purchases. And earlier this month, the U.S. Department of Agriculture urged its exporters to keep engaging with Chinese customers. So the American agriculture community and the government seem to be very, very bullish on the Chinese market. And so for those Canadians that are thinking about the Chinese market, does China's ramping up of purchases, what does that mean for the opportunity that Canadian producers might have for their exports of things like wheat and barley?
That, as I mentioned earlier, the government, they would like to see people are living better lives. So that's our philosophy. And the Chinese people really, are living better lives. And as they are doing so, there's huge demand for foreign products, including those agricultural products. So I think the trend is, in very good shape. And for us, the increase in grain imports is a natural result of China's efforts to optimize its grain structure. So high quality Canadian agricultural products are also welcome, as also it's the same case for seafood. Maybe it's not the interesting thing for the people in Alberta at the Saskatchewan, but really, we do also import a lot of seafood from Atlantic Canada. And we never impose restrictions on Canadian wheat, barley, beans, and the pork export. The fact is that for the first 11 months last year, China remained the largest market for Canadian wheat, barley, and beans, and the third largest market for Canadian pork export. Canadian export of barley and beans to China increased by 102% and 71% respectively, with barley export to China accounting for 93% of Canada's total export. So I think, again, those are very encouraging figures. So it is hoped that the trend will be a continued, trend, a momentum.
One of the things that I've read, though, and I think this is borne out by the fact that your imports are actually exceeding what your actual consumption is at any given time. And there are reports that you are stockpiling strategic supplies of wheat and barley and other such grains that you have a year, 18 months, perhaps even 2 years supply that's being stockpiled. Can you give an explanation for what's happening there?
I'm not so sure about the specific things you mentioned, but I understand for something, there's a stockpile, strategic stockpile. Maybe that's
right.
a case, but that doesn't affect, we are the people in China importing from Canada. I think all those things are determined by the demand from the Chinese people, and it's done by the market. That market nowadays is playing the most important role in making sure that what kind of things we import from the outside. Not the government, because it's not central planning economy. It's a market economy, but of course, with our distinctive features, but it is market economy. So I think that while the Canadian side, you have very good high quality agricultural products. So you should be happy with those record-setting, exports to China, and I think there will be a lot more to come in the coming years.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned, the idea of it being a market economy. I mean, I'm just making my way through this book right now, Market and State, and it's quite interesting because it does describe that that the Chinese economy is at its lowest level is a market economy. But I assume that when you mean with Chinese characteristics, that there is some direction in terms of the economy at the higher levels, and that somewhere in the middle there's kind of a mix of a market economy and a state driven economy. Would that be correct? Would that be how you would describe a market economy with Chinese characteristics?
I think, as I mentioned, the market is playing the determining role, in allocating all the resources, right? And the government is supposed to do its due part of the job to overseeing the market to make sure that it's an orderly run. And I think that's good because in all the other countries, even in Western countries, the government also has its responsibility. It's not like market doing everything, because for that it will be too wild and there will be uncontrolled expansion of capitals, and that's dangerous. So I think that we really, have identified our way forward over the past 40 years and plus since we launched reform and opening up, and we have found a right way to make sure that the market will do its part of the job and the government will shoulder its due responsibility. Of course, we can also learn something from the Western countries because you have all those lessons and experience accumulated in the past 200 years and even plus. So I think there's good for us to exchange views on this kind of thing, market and the government.
Thank you for that explanation. I appreciate that. I want to now switch to pork, and I want to give a little bit of background on this. When Canada signed its North American Free Trade Agreement Part 2 with the United States and Mexico, one of the provisions in it was that the parties were not to sign on with non-market agreements, with non-market economies, meaning China. And then shortly thereafter, the United States signed a Phase 1 trade agreement with China. And of the 22 items that are on that Phase 1 agreement, 14 of them are the very same things that Canada exports to China, which means that our largest customer in the United States is also one of our largest competitors. And so on the subject of pork, Americans were granted huge benefits under this Phase 1 agreement with China. For example, the agreement guarantees that American pork producers won't face some of the uncertainties that Canadian pork producers have. And I'm going to read this excerpt from the agreement verbatim. It says, Annex 7, Section 3, meat, poultry, and processed meat. Each time the U.S. provides China with an updated and complete list from the U.S. Food Safety Inspection Service approved facilities, China shall, within 20 days of receipt, publish the list under the General Administration of Customs China website and allow the importation into China products from all the facilities on that list. So to be clear, this isn't just about a 2-year purchase agreement. We're talking about a change to rules that create an opportunity for Americans, whereas Canadians don't have the benefit of those same rules. And so I guess my question to you is, what needs to be done to ensure that the provisions that are in the U.S.-China free trade agreement, Phase 1 free trade agreement, specifically like the clause that I read, the provision that I quoted, could that ever be extended to Canada? I mean, how do we get that accomplished?
First, I would like to emphasize once again that China adopts a positive and open attitude when it comes to importing high quality and safe products, including agricultural products like pork, meat from other countries, including Canada. And for last year, for the first, 11 months, the pork export from here, Canada to China, totaling close to 700 million Canadian dollars. So that's huge, very impressive figure. And for the trade agreement between China and the United States, I would like to emphasize the agreement reached is a win-win agreement, good for both China and the United States, international partners, including Canada, and the world economy as a whole. And actually, in the course of negotiations, both sides, I mean China and the United States, they insisted that the agreement would not target any third party or affect the legitimate rights and interests of any third party, and to ensure that it complies with WTO rules. And the procurement from the United States is a market behavior based on market price and commercial considerations. The Chinese government encourages its domestic enterprises to negotiate with American enterprises over import agreements in line with WTO rules and in a market-oriented approach. So what happened among United States, Canada, or Mexico? As you mentioned, the USMCA. I'm not so sure about all those specific details. So that's for your three countries to work out. But for this agreement between China and the United States, it is not targeted against any third party. And for your question, whether we can extend to that, it's a very specific question. I will rather leave that to experts. But my personal impression is that anything that is good for the trade and other practical cooperation between our two sides on the basis of mutual respect and win-win cooperation, I think that we will be positive to at least make a study into that and to find out whether that will be workable, in the future. So that's my personal impression for that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's also the impression of the United States Department of Agriculture, which I said in one of my earlier observations, is encouraged its producers to remain engaged with China. So in spite of whatever geopolitical issues there may be between the United States and China, some of which are the same as are in Canada, I mean, they recognize that the Chinese market remains an important one to their producers. So I've given you a bit of a foreshadowing of this question on the CPTPP, and it's very, very interesting to have you be able to answer this question because of your time and what happened with China's accession to the WTO now, I think 21 years ago. So I guess my first question is, tell me what you think the motivation is for China wanting to be part of the CPTPP. What is driving China's ambition to be a member?
I think that over the years, if people really follows the situation in China or in the Asia Pacific, as a whole, people will find out that China has always been a firm advocate of trade liberalization and facilitation, and an important participant in Asia Pacific regional cooperation and economic integration. China, for us, we believe that to achieve global economic recovery and prosperity, we must rely on multilateralism, greater openness, and innovation sharing. So that's very important, especially in the post-COVID-19 era. Openness and integration are the trend of the times, and the multilateralism and the greater openness are the right path to take. We must remove barriers, open up and not close off. We must trying to do more to seek integration and not decoupling. So this is the right choice in addressing global economic governance issues. And last year, last September, as you mentioned, China officially, launched its bid, for joining CPTPP. And I think it once again demonstrates our firm confidence in improving opening up and promoting regional economic cooperation. So I think that you can see that already RCEP is coming into effect this January. And with that, coming into force, China's accession to the CPTPP will be further conducive to promoting the process of Asia-Pacific regional economic integration, further unleashing the huge potential for trade liberalization in the area. So I think that is a good thing, not only to China, but also for all the other members of the Asia-Pacific community.
So let's talk about your time 20 years ago when you were dealing with the WTO. I mean, China made some tremendous reforms in order to satisfy the rules of the WTO. There are observers who have expressed optimism and others that have expressed skepticism as to whether or not China can meet the requirements of being a member of the CPTPP, particularly on issues like labor and the environment and SOEs. And so let me ask this in two parts. The first part is, what comparisons do you see between China's accession and joining of the WTO with China's desire to join the CPTPP today?
I'm glad you have, actually draw our attention to WTO, because I think that provides a very good example when we are talking about China's bid to join CPTPP. I think there are similarities and differences. The similarities is that both demonstrates China's commitment to open up even wider to the outside. And the differences, the major difference is that back 20 years ago, China at that time, although 20 years after reform and the opening up, is still at a fairly backward stage. And currently, after more than 40 years of reform and opening up, you can see that China is at a higher starting point when we apply for the membership of CPTPP. Because after so many years of reform and opening up, really we have learned a lot, and really we have did a lot to opening our country wider to the outside. And we have all those business environment in place which are suitable for further opening up to the outside. And our message is very clear that we will be continuing this process to opening up at a wider range, at higher level, and with those very firm commitment. So I think there are similarities and the differences.
So would China be prepared to make the same kind of reforms to the extent that they did 20 years ago in order to join CPTPP? And let me ask specifically on the issues of labor and SOEs and the environment.
Yeah. You know that you are quite right that more than 20 years ago, China did a lot when was joining WTO. For us to do a lot of things to make sure that we will meet the expectation of the people and to be in line with the principles of WTO. For example, over 2,000 laws, regulations, and the departmental rules have been drafted, revised, and revoked at the central government level, and above 190,000 local regulations, rules, and other policy measures have been sorted out at local government level. And China's overall tariff rate has been cut from 15.3% to 7.4%, well below the 9.8% accession commitment. So it demonstrates that when China pledged something, that we will do our best to make sure that we fulfill the commitment and we honor our pledge. And I think it's the same thing for CPTPP, whether it's a labor standard or environmental issues and the SOE. For environmental issues, it is very obvious that China is doing a lot of things these days to make sure that we will be meeting the expectations of CPTPP or even doing better than that, enshrined in the CPTPP. For example, we have pledged to make sure that our CO2 emission will peak by 2030, and we will be having the carbon neutrality by 2060. And it only takes 30 years from the peak of CO2 emission to carbon neutrality. It's not easy for China because China is still a developing country. It's still in the stage of industrialization. And even for industrialized countries, Western countries, it will take them more time, than that. So, for the United States, I think it's more than 40 years to achieve carbon neutrality from carbon, the peak of CO2 emission. So for China, it's a daunting task, but we have fleshed out already, the action plan, not only those slogans, but already we have the actual action plans on ground, covering a lot of, different parts of our economy to make sure that we will be honoring our commitment. And as you can see for SOE, there's a lot of reforms taking place over the past few decades. And certainly we will do a lot of things in the coming months and the coming years to make sure that we will be meeting those, principles enshrined in the CPTPP. And we have already worked on that and sorted out the actions that we have to take, and are doing a lot of research work and study on that. So it once again demonstrates we are really serious about the bid to join CPTPP.
I think you've just raised something very important, and that is about your future plans. And that's a good segue into my last broad question, and that's to talk about China's 14th five-year plan and vision to 2035 or 2025, which was adopted earlier this year in March 2021. I think that Canada West Foundation has done a lot of work in this area. And I think the reason why we've been so focused on it is because, to put it bluntly, if you're a second largest trade partner, signals what it's going to do in the next 5 years in terms of policy direction. I think it's really important that as a business, you understand what those policy signals are and what that presents to you as either risk or opportunity. And so I want to hear from you. I'm curious to hear from you what it is that businesses need to know, those that are planning to continue with trade or expand trade. What do they need to know about the 5-year plan? That's a very, very broad question. I might have some more specific things to ask you, but let's start with that.
Yeah, you mentioned the status of China being the second largest trading partner for Canada, several times. I think that's a fact. And for this second place, it's a distant second from the United States. And maybe we cannot win the gold medal, for many years to come. But if we work on that, like if we look into the 14th five-year plan and to identify more areas for our practical cooperation, I think we are catching up, maybe not getting the first place, but we'll soon be close to that. So maybe I will be sharing with you some of the highlights of a 14th five-year plan, because also it's a very comprehensive plan. And the first thing is that we should see the huge potential of the Chinese market. For example, the plan proposes to expand the middle income group with an emphasis on graduates from universities and the vocational colleges and the skilled workers to continuously enlarge the middle income group. China's middle income population has now been above 400 million, and the expansion of the group will further increase its demand for high quality and innovative products and services, which will bring business opportunities for Canadian companies, including those in the Western region. At the same time, Western Canada also has its advantage in higher education and vocational education. So I think that's also an opportunity that can be, explored by the Western region in Canada. And also, secondly, the 14th five-year plan also proposes to implement a new energy security strategy, which requires diversified sources of oil and gas imports. Western Canada, as we know, is rich and technologically advanced in energy resources. In fact, many oil and gas companies in Western Canada have already cooperated well with Chinese companies, and there is room for both sides to further expand and deepen cooperation during the 14th Five-Year Plan period. Thirdly, there is great potential for cooperation in agricultural products. So as we discussed earlier, and the plan proposes to implement a food security strategy and calls for active international cooperation in important agricultural products and the diversification of import sources. Western Canada is an important area of agricultural production and exports, with strong international competitiveness in terms of relevant products. So its export potential to China can be further explored. And also, in addition, the plan lays out policies in various areas, such as promoting green development, speeding up digital development, upgrading the manufacturing industry, and improving home care service, all of which have provided great business opportunities for companies in Western Canada. So for China, now the average life expectancy is 77.3 years. And we hope that by the end of the 14th Five-Year Plan period, it will be increased by additional 1 year. So it means that we are really entering a silver society. And for those elderly care, I think it's also a very key market for the Canadian service providers. So all in all, I see a lot of areas for potential cooperation between China and Canada. And of course, that includes the western part of Canada.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I actually, you covered a number of areas. I was actually going to ask you about clean technologies, but you actually addressed that. So I appreciate that. So we're now at 5 minutes to the hour, 5 minutes to noon, where you are, 5 minutes to 10, where I am. So I really appreciate you being generous with your time, Ambassador. Are there any closing remarks that you'd like to make?
Yeah, again, I would like to express my thanks to you, Gary, and the Foundation for organizing this wonderful event. And also, I think that the most prominent feature of today's discussion is specific, pragmatic, candid, and to the point. I think that embodying both the style and the philosophy of the Canada West Foundation and the personality and the character of the people from Western Canada. So I really enjoyed today's conversation. And I would like to say that in a few days' time, the Chinese Year of the Tiger will come. And the tiger in Chinese culture implies vitality, courage, and health. I would like to take this opportunity to extend to the people here present today the very best wishes for the new year. And also, I would like to make a few remarks that hopefully the Year of the Tiger will bring to us. First, to pursue peace and prosperity. As the Chinese saying goes, when one's home is peaceful and prosperous, everything else will go smoothly as well. Relations between countries are similar. When countries respect each other and get along peacefully, then the world will also enjoy peace, development, and prosperity. This is in the best interest of every country and also the common aspiration of people all over the world to make sure that we have this kind of cooperation and to make sure that we will be enjoying peace and development. Second, to seek mutual benefit and the win-win results. Economic globalization is a trend that cannot be stopped. Currently, while the global economy is generally maintaining a momentum of recovery, it is still confronted with many challenges, and the driving force of growth is weakening. All parties need to come together and strengthen cooperation, build the sense of community to promote the stable recovery of global economy. China and Canada are both important global economies, and we are duty-bound to do our part. In the new year, China will continue to open up to the world and enable the world to share the new opportunities brought by China's development. we welcome Canadian companies to expand cooperation with China and share the dividends of China's development in the coming years. And finally, to keep harmony in diversity. In Chinese culture, to keep harmony in diversity is a virtue of gentlemen. In Western culture, to respect for others is considered to be gentlemanly. The world is colorful and diverse. The diversity of civilizations and the differences of systems shouldn't be taken as reasons for confrontation. It is hard for countries to avoid disagreements and divergence, but pursuing zero-sum games is not helpful at all. So we believe China and Canada, we should try to find the greatest common denominator in our cooperation and handling our disputes or differences in a proper way. Let's join hands for a better future in the coming new year, the year of Tiger. So that's the message I would like to share with you, Gary, and all the people joining this event today. Thank you.
Ambassador Zhang, thank you. And on behalf of all of us at Canada West Foundation, we bid you a happy Year of the Tiger. I should note, I'm glad you raised it because I am born in the Year of the Tiger. I leave it for people to conclude whether I am 48, 60, or 72 years of age. So let me say this. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope it was of value to the people who are our viewers, our members, the supporters of the Canada West Foundation. At the Canada West Foundation, we are always seeking to bring important matters that are relevant to Western Canadians, and that is part of our mission. I appreciated the candor in which you answered my questions. That is an important part of being a diplomat. I want to encourage those that were watching to make a donation if you appreciated what you saw today. Become a subscriber to our China Brief. Read our reports in agricultural trade with China. You'll find some of the deepest dives in the public policy area in our writing. Become a sponsor of Canada West Foundation. Send us a big check. And if it's too big, I'll make sure I send back the difference. Look, thank you very much for all who participated in this. And again, thank you very much, Ambassador, and happy Year of the Tiger to you and your family. Thank you for joining us today. I bid you all well.
Thank you. All the best to you.